So, Peter, people think that running CI workloads on Kubernetes is all rainbow and unicorns. Let's sprinkle some magic Kubernetes dust on it. But we both know that's not reality. There's some real challenges to running CI workflows on Kubernetes, and we've put together our top 5 challenges. Why don't you go ahead and kick it off?
Yeah, the first one, it's the impedance mismatch, right? You think this ephemeral execution model of CI and Kubernetes are going to match up together, but there's different things going on. They're not quite the same speed. You're going to have cost savings by scaling up and down, but you got to be careful. You don't want to evict a pod that's doing work, right? The consumption model of a build is extremely spiky, and it doesn't quite match how you're saving costs and allocating resources with Kubernetes. Parallelism is wonderful, but now you need a copy of your repo on every pod, or you need a persistent volume claim that's going to be shared among these, and the complexity just starts to spiral. So speaking of complexity, what's the second one?
Right. So the second one is that building containers in Kubernetes gets weird, right? We're running a container on a container runtime, but how do you do the build interface? Docker and Docker is ugly, but there's great tools to replace that on the market. Not, but they don't use the standard Docker file interface. So you can choose things like Bazel, Jib, build packs, Canico, Buildkite, but how does that interact with your local development workflow and what your teams are used to using today? What about the next problem, Peter?
Yeah, the next problem is lock down the build, right? Security, job number 0. You want to have network security here, but now you've got to have interpod communication. So interpod communication is easy when everything's open and can talk to each other. But as soon as you start to restrict who can talk to what, it gets complicated. Now you've got host access to think about. Super convenient to have that host access, but that's a privilege escalation path that you want to lock down. And then RBAC, Kubernetes expects the namespace to be the only scoping capability, but you've got credentials you want to share among build agents. You've got credentials you want to share to be able to deploy different places, and that scoping gets challenging. What's the next challenge, James?
Yeah, the next one is caching is hard, right? You have this ephemeral nature, you have things spinning up and down, but now you don't have a consistent copy of things rolling around everywhere. And you certainly don't want to download node modules every single time. Bazel remote caching is really the best of breed in this ecosystem, but Bazel can get complex, especially for teams who haven't worked with it before. And then if you're building a monorepo ecosystem, things like GitLab and GitHub network charges can actually become a problem if you start to clone the repository in every job step. Now, what's the last challenge that you've seen, Peter?
Yeah, this one, we call it the tool layering challenge. A workflow is not a native concept in Kubernetes. You've got to put something behind there, or you've got to layer something on top of it to model workflows and dependencies the way you'd expect to get them in the CI tool. And then you've got isolation and other capability problems where, let's say you want to use Istio service mesh and you want to use Vault, and these two don't play well together. So you've got complexity there. So all this complaining, all these problems, why do we keep doing it? Why do we keep going to Kubernetes for CI? Close us out, James.
It's great. There's challenges that we have to face when we're building these systems, but it's really worth it, right? People have built really effective build ecosystems and developer experiences on top of Kubernetes. We're going to keep going in this conversation to outline some real advantages that we can get and how we can overcome the challenges that we've outlined here.